The day she was sold, the sky was so wide it felt like it might swallow her whole. At 19, standing beside a man with dirt under his nails and silence in his eyes, she believed her life had ended before it had ever truly begun. Her name was Eliza Mayfield, and until that morning she had belonged to a small house that smelled of soap and disappointment. Her mother had raised her alone after her father vanished into the river one winter and never came back. Love in that house had been measured, rationed like flour during lean seasons. When money grew scarce, and it always did, Eliza learned early that usefulness was a currency more valuable than affection. So when the poor farmer arrived with a folded bill and a quiet voice, her mother did not hesitate. "He'll take her," the auctioneer announced, as if Eliza were a sack of grain instead of a girl with trembling hands. The man did not smile when he paid. He did not leer or boast. He simply nodded once, like someone accepting a burden he had already decided to carry. His name was Thomas Hale. The wagon ride to his farm was long and nearly silent. Dust clung to Eliza's dress. Her thoughts spiraled darker with every mile. She had heard stories whispered by other girls, stories of rough hands, of wedding nights that felt like punishments rather than promises. She sat rigid on the wooden bench, bracing herself for a future she did not want but had no power to refuse. Thomas drove steadily, eyes forward, reins loose in his hands. He did not look at her once. When they arrived, the farm was smaller than she expected. A single house, weathered and leaning slightly to the west. A barn that had seen better decades. Fields that stretched thin and stubborn under the sun. "This is it," he said quietly. She nodded, afraid her voice might break. Inside, the house was clean but plain. One table, 2 chairs, a bed in a small room with a quilt folded neatly at the foot. Eliza noticed with a strange tightening in her chest that there was only one pillow. They were married that afternoon by a traveling preacher who smelled of sweat and ink. The words were spoken quickly, as if everyone wanted the moment over with. When it was done, Eliza was suddenly a wife, though she felt no different, still hollow, still waiting for something painful to begin. Night fell softly. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, heart pounding so loudly she was sure Thomas could hear it from the other room. She stared at the floorboards, counting the cracks, rehearsing how she would endure what was coming. She told herself to be still, to be quiet, to survive. The door creaked open. Thomas stood there, hat in his hands, face shadowed by lamplight. He looked older up close, lines etched deep by sun and work, and something heavier she could not name. He cleared his throat once. "You don't owe me anything tonight," he said. Eliza blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "I mean it," he continued, voice steady but low. "You didn't choose this. I won't take what isn't freely given." She lifted her eyes for the first time and saw something there that unraveled her completely. Not hunger, not ownership, but restraint. "There's a blanket in the other room," he said. "I'll sleep there. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer." And then he left. Eliza sat frozen long after the door closed. When the tears came, they surprised her with their force. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound, her entire body shaking as something she had been holding in for years finally broke free. That night did not change her life because of what happened. It changed her life because of what didn't. The days that followed were awkward but gentle. Thomas rose before dawn and worked until the light failed. Eliza helped where she could, cooking, mending, learning the rhythm of the land. He never touched her without permission, never raised his voice, never reminded her of what he had paid. Weeks passed, then months. Trust did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly, like morning light slipping through cracks in the walls. Eliza began to notice small things. How Thomas left a portion of food aside for her before serving himself. How he listened when she spoke, really listened as if her words mattered. How he paused before entering a room, giving her time to prepare herself. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Eliza found herself speaking without planning to. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. Thomas stared into the flames for a long moment. "Because no one else would," he said finally, "and because I knew what it was like to be trapped with no one willing to see you as human." She did not ask him what he meant. She didn't need to. Seasons turned. The farm remained poor, but it was no longer empty. Eliza laughed for the first time in years when a chicken escaped the coop, and Thomas chased it halfway across the yard, swearing under his breath. She sang quietly while hanging laundry, her voice growing stronger as her fear faded. One night, months after their wedding, she stood in the doorway of the small room where Thomas slept. "You don't have to stay in there forever," she said softly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Only if you're sure." She was. What followed was not rushed or taken. It was patient, tender, a meeting of two people who had both known loneliness and chosen, carefully, to step toward one another. Eliza learned then that intimacy could be something other than fear, that her body was not a debt to be collected but a home she could choose to share. Years passed. The farm survived droughts and winters that bit hard. Eliza grew into a woman who stood straight and spoke with confidence. Thomas aged too, lines deepening, hands growing rougher, but his gentleness never faded. They had children, two boys with their father's steady eyes and their mother's quiet strength. Eliza watched Thomas kneel to their level when he spoke, teaching them with patience instead of fear. She knew then that the choice he made on their wedding night had echoed forward, shaping not just her life, but theirs as well. One evening, long after the children were grown, Eliza asked him, "Do you ever regret it, not taking what the world said was yours?" Thomas smiled, soft and certain. "No," he said. "That night was the first time I felt rich." Eliza leaned against him, the field stretching gold before them. At 19, she had been sold like something broken. But on her wedding night, a poor farmer gave her something priceless, choice. And that choice changed her life forever. The years after that answer did not soften life, but they deepened it. Time moved the way it always does on the plains, slow when you were inside it, astonishingly fast when you looked back. Eliza sometimes caught herself standing in the doorway at dusk, watching Thomas work the fields with their sons, and felt the strange ache of gratitude mixed with disbelief. This was not the life she had imagined when she was 19 and terrified. This was not the ending she had prepared herself to endure. And yet, here she stood, breathing it in like something earned rather than given. Their oldest boy, Samuel, grew tall and quiet like his father. The younger Noah was quick to laugh and quicker to argue, fire where Samuel was stone. Eliza loved them both fiercely, but she worried too. The world beyond their farm had teeth. It had taken her once, measured her worth in coin, and she knew it could do the same to her sons if she and Thomas were not careful about the lessons they taught. One night after the boys were asleep, Eliza voiced that fear. "They'll go out there someday," she said, stirring a pot that no longer needed stirring. "They'll meet people who think strength is cruelty and love is ownership." Thomas leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then we teach them different," he said, "same way we learned." She looked at him, "We." He met her gaze, steady as ever. "I wasn't born knowing how to be gentle," he admitted. "I chose it every day." That was the truth of him. Thomas Hale did nothing by accident, not kindness, not restraint, not love. Each was a decision made again and again, even when it cost him something. Trouble came the year Samuel turned 16. A neighboring landowner, wealthy and loud, decided the boundary between their properties had been measured wrong decades earlier. He brought men and papers and threats. He laughed at Thomas's worn coat and Eliza's plain dress. He called them small, insignificant, easily moved. Eliza felt the old fear stir in her chest, the instinct to shrink, to step back, to let louder voices decide her fate. But she did not obey it this time. She stood beside Thomas as he spoke, calm but unyielding. When the man sneered at her and suggested Thomas should control his woman, Eliza felt something settle inside her, solid and unbreakable. "I am not owned," she said, her voice clear, "and neither is this land." The man scoffed, but he saw it then. The way Thomas did not interrupt her, did not speak over her, did not assert himself to reassert dominance. He saw partnership, and it unsettled him more than defiance ever could. They fought the claim. It took months, meetings in dusty offices, letters written late into the night. It took money they could barely spare, but they won. That night, Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Eliza with a smile that held pride and something deeper. "You scared him," he said. She laughed softly. "Good." Later, Samuel asked why his mother had spoken instead of his father. Thomas answered before Eliza could. "Because strength doesn't always wear the same face," he said, "and because your mother earned her voice." The boys remembered that lesson. Years later, when Samuel brought home a girl with wary eyes and a habit of apologizing for existing, Eliza recognized the signs immediately. She welcomed her warmly, fed her generously, listened more than she spoke. She watched Thomas treat the girl with the same quiet respect he had shown Eliza decades earlier. When the girl left that night, she hugged Eliza tightly and whispered, "I didn't know homes could feel like this." Eliza stood in the doorway long after she was gone, heart full and aching. Not all days were gentle. There were winters when food ran low and illness crept close. One year, Noah nearly died from a fever that burned through him like fire. Eliza sat at his bedside for nights without sleep, fear clawing at her, memories of helplessness threatening to pull her under. Thomas stayed too, silent and steady, grounding her when her thoughts ran wild. When Noah finally opened his eyes and asked for water, Eliza collapsed against Thomas, sobbing into his chest. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "You won't face it alone," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely let surface. They buried friends. They celebrated births. They learned that love did not protect you from pain, but it gave pain a place to land where it would not destroy you. One evening, long after their sons had left to build lives of their own, Eliza and Thomas sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The house creaked around them, older now, fuller. "Do you ever think about her?" Thomas asked suddenly. Eliza knew who he meant. The girl she had been. The one who sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for something terrible to happen. "Yes," she said, "I think about her often." "What would you tell her if you could?" Eliza closed her eyes. That her worth isn't decided by who buys her or who takes her. That fear doesn't mean weakness, and that one good choice can undo 1,000 cruel ones. Thomas nodded slowly. "She need to hear that." "So would a lot of people," Eliza said. When Thomas passed, it was quiet. No drama, no long suffering. He died as he had lived, without spectacle, with dignity intact. Eliza held his hand and told him she loved him, the words steady and sure. After, the house felt impossibly large. The silence was different now, no longer gentle but hollow. Eliza moved through her days with practiced strength, supported by her sons, her grandchildren, the life she and Thomas had built together. One afternoon, sorting through old things, she found the folded blanket Thomas had once offered her on their wedding night. It smelled faintly of time and memory. She pressed it to her chest and laughed softly through tears. That night had not been the absence of love. It had been the beginning of it. Eliza lived long enough to see her grandchildren grow, to see kindness passed down like an inheritance stronger than land or money. When she finally joined Thomas, she did so knowing this truth with unshakable certainty. She had not been saved by being bought. She had been saved by being seen. And the choice made by a poor farmer on a quiet wedding night had echoed forward, changing not just one life, but generations.